Welcome to Edie Extra, edie.net's home for all of our exclusive special audio features. As more voices, businesses and initiatives join the conversation on environmental sustainability and tackling the climate crisis, Edie Extra cuts through the noise. We'll be asking the big questions about the hot topics, profiling seasoned leaders, and getting out and about, taking you to the heart of the action with on-site recordings from site visits and events across the world. Welcome to the place to find in-depth conversations with sustainability leaders about sustainability leadership. Welcome to Edie Extra.
Hello everyone and welcome back to The Green Room, where the ED team sits down with the biggest names in corporate sustainability to gain valuable insights on the trends, as well as reflecting on the evolution of the sustainability movement. I'm ED's editor Matt Mace, and I'm delighted to welcome our listeners back to The Green Room, and even more delighted to say that our guest for this episode is Claudine Blamey, the Group Director of Sustainability at Aviva. Now, Claudine has been at Aviva for around 2 years now, and her prior roles include sustainability positions at Argent, EasyJet, Sainsbury's, the Crown Estate, British Land and Honda in a career that spans more than 25 years. So I think it's fair to say that things have changed a lot in that time. Claudine, thank you so much for joining us today in the Green Room. I mean, I say the Green Room, we're actually at Aviva studio, which is far more impressive than our Green Room recording studio. But thank you so much for inviting me up.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And obviously got a lot I want to get through today in this discussion, and especially speaking to someone that's had kind of so many different roles at different businesses across the sustainability journey. But I think it's best to start with Aviva. You've been there, I think it's almost like 2 years at the time of recording, almost 2 years to the day, essentially. So maybe we can start with just a bit of a remit about the role itself and what it is, what your kind of key aims are at Aviva as CSO.
Great, yeah, happy to dive in there. Yes, it has been 2 years. It's been 2 years almost to the day. It's been fantastic. I've learnt a lot already in the past 2 years. My role covers, it's group-wide, so it covers social action, climate action and sustainable business. I've got a team for all of those, and we cover the strategy part of ambition. We have a very ambitious ambition to be net zero by 2040. And also we are focusing on our social action area, which is about 50 places in the UK, becoming financially resilient, and also looking at resilience in a broader term. Mm-hmm. So from a climate perspective, as well as working with our partners in those 50 areas. We particularly want to focus on where we have a big presence.
That's quite a lot of kind of big general targets, net zero by 2040, resiliency across place-based spaces. So I imagine it's kind of all systems go. The next question I had was kind of like the biggest challenge you're facing right now. I suppose there's unique challenges across all those different kind of parts of your strategy. But in terms of Aviva and I suppose just the role of a sustainability professional in the world we're in, what does the kind of challenge look like? Is it still in a place where we're trying to get kind of more understanding of this? Is it very much now looking at the kind of delivery points and actually starting to make progress?
Yeah, so when I first started my career, I think we were all looking at what does integrating sustainability mean? Actually, we didn't call it sustainability then. It was environmental or corporate responsibility. And then I think that changed to, we need to set some really big ambitions. Corporates are interested, they know what this is about. And we all started sort of setting big ambitions. And that was sort of in the 2020s, 2021s. That's when Aviva set their ambition to be net zero by 2040. And then now I think we've changed gear. And this is about delivery. And I call it, this is when the rubber hits the road. We've got to actually think about how we deliver this across our business, across our supply chains, across everything we do, including how we build knowledge, capability within our own businesses to be able to deliver that. And when I say knowledge and capability, I don't mean we hire loads more people we do need people with different skills, but actually understanding what accountants need to know, understanding what actuaries need to know, understanding what fund managers need to know on a day-to-day basis to be able to make the right decisions. So that's the kind of thing we're starting to work on now as well. I think from a workforce perspective, again, it's changed a lot. So we had lots of generalists when I first started. I'm an environmental scientist by training, so did all the environmental elements of Honda when I first started off, for example. But actually now it's changed. So the CSO role is more generalist, but then the CSOs tend to have more specialist people underneath them. So whether it's climate risk people, whether it's scenario analysis specifically, whether it's measuring social impact. So they become very much specialist roles that you need in the organisation. But then I think the strength comes when people within every role are able to use their knowledge to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because there's lots of kind of, I suppose, surveys and research to show that kind of the current workforce, or at least the next pipeline of young workforce coming in, care about climate. They want to work for organisations that are shown to be doing their part. But that's not to say that there's not a kind of existing work pool out there that have business experience that don't quite equate to climate, but could easily if they're uptraining staff. So it sounds like the CSO role is kind of not just kind of finding your champions and those specialist ones you mentioned, but actually making, I suppose, climate and circularity and decarbonisation part of everyone's role. That sounds incredibly hard. I'm sure it is. How is that shaping up to actually kind of embed that and make it, I suppose, part of the business cog?
That's a good question. We're just starting on that journey. I mean, we've been doing sustainability training across the business for many years, but now we're looking at it from a role-based perspective. So what does someone who's in accountancy need to know from a role perspective to be able to deliver and make decisions on sustainability? And even down to the level of what kind of accountancy they do. What do our actuaries need to know? So I think it does become very much, our HR team, for example, as well, becomes role-based, and that's how we're going to try and tackle it over the next few years. And we've started with our actuary team and looking at that and the knowledge that they will need to be able to implement that on a day-to-day basis. And then maybe we can have a chat next year and I can tell you how we've got on with that. But I think that's the way we should all be looking at integration and embedding, as some people like to use.
And we've spoken a lot about the kind of internal setups and changing there, but you mentioned, when you started out at Honda, and I know you've been at places like Sainsbury's, EasyJet, the Crown Estate since then. And it seems in probably the last kind of 6 or 7 years, there's been this real kind of gear shift externally in terms of the external, call them pressures, call them levers, whatever they are, to actually kind of kickstart climate, whether that's policy, general understanding, climate coverage has kind of gone mainstream in terms of media coverage as well. The awareness is kind of at an all-time high. So how has that changed the role of a sustainability professional in terms of how you maybe make the business case or start to engage? And now you have all those extra external kind of understanding. Is that a help? Is it actually a hindrance? What's the kind of feeling there?
It's really helpful. It is helpful to have. I mean, as a CSO, you've got to have, obviously think about internally and how you're going to integrate into the business. But without the external environment and knowledge of what's going on out there, you can't do the internal piece. So you've got to look at all your stakeholders externally and how you influence and how you manage that. But I also think you need to have this view of a sort of horizon scanning view all the time. You need to understand what's coming down the pipeline in terms of regulations. You need to understand what the big trends are worldwide and to be able to bring the outside into the business. Because without that outside in, you don't get the innovation. And ultimately, we need innovation in this space. We are transforming from one energy source totally to another. This is big. And I'm not sure everyone quite realises what that means. We need different financial flows and architecture. We need different business models to be able to tackle this. And circularity is one of them you already mentioned. But there are many other different business models that need to change, and particularly around supply chains to be able to deliver. So the outside-in view is very, very important. I think it also helps to drive board decision-making, exco decision-making, to show what's going on externally and to be able to see what the relevance of that is to our own business and then to be able to make decisions off the back of that.
And I'd love to talk a bit more about you mentioned your own business and you mentioned financial flows, because Aviva being in the kind of finance sector in general is quite interesting. Anecdotally, I've seen quite a few in-house sustainability professionals working in like manufacturing or retail, like I know you have, move into finance as it's kind of started to really pick up the pace on this. So how is that kind of different working at a place like Aviva compared to those more kind of end-user ones? Because it used to be that the kind of broad level, it felt like financial institutions and professionals spoke a different language to your kind of more common CSR professionals. Was that kind of an adjustment period, or is it actually kind of quite broadly aligned?
Good question. It's very different. I think when I was at Sainsbury's, probably a good one to talk about, because Sainsbury's, you saw any decision that was made actually happen on the ground. So mostly through supply chains. So you would talk to the buyers about what you wanted integrated in terms of climate or social action, and that would then end up being a part of how they would purchase something. Or if it was a supplier that you had direct relationship with, you could go and see them, you can go to talk to them, like fair trade, for example, or where you got your bananas from, or all of those sorts of things. And so it's much more, there's much more influence, there's much more control of what you can do. In the finance sector, you are 2, 3, 4 steps removed from that, because the closest you get is if you're investing in real assets and you have some control over that, how a building is built or how a building is run, the energy efficiency of that, etc. But as you come away from that, so sovereigns, for example, that becomes a lot harder to influence and control. You have some influence, you have engagement, you can engage with those nations, but that's as far as it goes. And you are one of millions of other investors who's doing that. So it's a very different relationship, and you start to have more kind of strategies around influencing and engaging, as opposed to having the ability to actually deliver on the ground.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot of trust involved once that influence and engagement is taking place. And actually, I wanted to kind of reflect, I suppose, on the skill set of a sustainability professional. And I suppose the question is two-part. And right now, in this kind of age of, we know the window to act is shrinking, but we know there's all this kind of rising reporting disclosure requirements. I think a lot of businesses are looking back over their shoulder what they've done and not as much to the future as they would have liked. There's this kind of internal engagement piece, as you mentioned. What's the kind of, in your opinion, the most important skill for a sustainability leader right now? And I suppose the second part of that question is, has that changed from maybe kind of 10, 15 years ago when you were working at kind of Crown Estate or Sainsbury's or EasyJet?
I think for me, as a CSO, influencing is one of the biggest skills, and I don't think that's changed. I think it's always been about influencing. I think maybe the level of influencing has changed, and I suppose it's expanded as well in terms of the stakeholders that you've got to engage and try and influence. So internally, it's about influencing the board, it's about exco influencing, it's about influencing your colleagues to want to do the right thing, and winning hearts and minds. It's not just about logic. You've got to win people over. And then externally, it's about investors, it's about looking at your supply chain, it's about influencing all of those different government policy, nationally and internationally. We've just seen what's happened at COP. So it's a lot broader, but it is still very much influencing. And then I think other roles within this sector have become much more specific. So data has become very, very important for us. And I think understanding data, being able to make it business specific, how do we turn data into management decisions? How do we do scenario analysis? And all of those sorts of things need skills. And it's a different skill to what, when I first started, we needed. It was on Excel spreadsheets and, we did some reporting, but now it's become much, much more sophisticated.
Yeah. I think the Excel spreadsheet still has its role to play, but it's good to see that there are some slightly more sophisticated strategy approaches out there. And you mentioned COP as well. I know. At the time of recording this, you've just got back from Colombia. You're out for COP16 for the biodiversity discussions. I suppose as a starting point, how was it out there? What was the kind of mood like? I always find it quite interesting when we look at climate COPs, the difference between the kind of really kind of compassionate, heartfelt conversations happening in the plenaries to the kind of more, not to call it like a festival, but it's like a business demonstration sometimes. So what was the kind of mood like out in Cali?
When I was out there, it was really positive. There were lots of businesses there. There were lots of indigenous community there, which was really, really good. The fact that it was in Cali, it was, we are in it. We're in the biodiversity that we're talking about, which was helpful. I think the presidency was incredibly passionate. But since I've left, I think, I was there in the first week, things don't seem to have planned out as we wanted, which is basically we need more money pumped into biodiversity, and so that we become positive in this sense and not, degrading the biodiversity as much as we have been. When we were out there, we launched a report and the sector pathways with WWF. I think the sector pathways is really important. I think each sector needs to understand how to become nature positive and what the path to that is, a bit like climate sector pathways. I also think we need to join those things up because we will end up creating silos, and they're not silos, they're part of a whole system, and we need to make sure that they are thought of as one. And hopefully, I think that message landed in this COP, and hopefully we'll see a bit more in COP 29 later as well, later this month.
Yeah, having two separate COPs is quite confusing, quite necessary, I suppose, as well, but it does create the risk that those are siloed conversations at a global level, I suppose. We didn't go out there, but I think there was something like 3,000 businesses out there. Are you surprised about this kind of, I suppose, uptick in corporate appetite for understanding or action on nature?
Yes, definitely. I think people are starting to see through their supply chain that there is an impact, and to be able to protect those supply chains, they need to take action, and that's why so many businesses were interested. I mean, we had Unilever, we had Nestle, we had all the big sort of businesses with big supply chains. We had GSK. They are so dependent on nature across the world that without them doing something about it and impacting this in a positive way, we're just never gonna get anywhere. And I think that's what was really positive to see.
What do you think? I suppose as a build onto that, there's lots of interest there. I think a lot of businesses are probably still in a kind of like, we're figuring this out on nature. Is there anything like on the horizon, whether that's reporting frameworks or stuff that you think that will really kind of help create a kind of or act as a catalyst, I suppose, for business to be able to actually report, uncover, and ultimately act on nature?
I think so. I think we did our first, Aviva did our first biodiversity report back in 2021. I think there is frameworks now coming. I think that it would be helpful if people did start doing that. But I really ultimately think that nations need to start producing their own reports. And I think there should be transition reports, not climate transition, nature transition, but transition reports that include both climate and nature. And then off the back of that, they need to provide guidance for the different sectors, which we now have, to be able to also report their transition plans. I think then we'll start to see what each sector is doing, what each business is doing, and what each country is doing. And then we can start to see the flows of finance, trying to help with that as well. Because without that information, without those plans, it's very difficult in the finance sector to be able to actually align the financial flows to the doing the right thing.
I think it's really important that doing the right thing is the mindset there. And yeah, we've covered quite a lot in the kind of 20 minutes already, from everything from those kind of place-based stuff, supply chains, nature, renewable assets as well. There's so much that still needs to happen, and as I mentioned, the window to do it shrink inside, and we're approaching the end of 2024. I don't know where it's gone, but it's kind of come and gone at that. So as we look ahead to 2025, which is quite a key kind of milestone year, I think, for a lot of businesses. They probably would have had a lot of kind of interim, short-term targets set for them to then build on. When you look at, I suppose, the evolution of corporate sustainability into 2025, what is it that you're really hoping to see?
Good question. So we've just launched the third Climate Ready Index. And you can see from that actually there's a positive story. You can see that the G7 countries, are positively progressing. You can see that those even right at the bottom, which was the US, are doing the right things. The Inflation Reduction Act has really helped with that. It's a really good example. Germany's still at the top because they've got good policies, good regulations in place. They've put finances behind that to be able to deliver that. Again, really good examples we can take from that. But I'm optimistic because I've seen that the G7 countries and Ireland are stepping up and they are making progress. Are they making enough progress? Yet to be seen, but I think at least it's moving in the right direction.
Brilliant. Really good to always have that kind of positive mindset, which is great. And I suppose then just to finish on, to look even further ahead, because I did some kind of rounding up on LinkedIn based on your kind of job role. So I might be off about the years a little bit, but I think it's around about kind of 25 years that you've been a kind of sustainability professional. If we were to look ahead to another 25 years, that's pretty much 2050 then, which is the kind of end goal for net zero in terms of what science kind of advises. Appreciate I'm asking you to gaze into a crystal ball here, but over that next kind of 2.5 decades, I suppose if we were to catch up then, what do you think would be different about corporate sustainability? I realise that's kind of how long is a piece of string there, but how do you see that looking different than it is today?
Well, I hope I would have retired. I don't think I can manage another 25 years. I think I'm an optimist, so I can see a world where we would have come away from fossil fuels, we would have reduced our emissions to zero. We would be living in a world where we have had positive impact on nature and we've become nature positive, and we've come up with processes that use materials over and over and over again. We don't have to extract new materials from the ground, and we are living in much more sustainable, community focused, just and a fair world. Now, is that too optimistic? I don't know. I like to be optimistic.
I think so. I think from what you're describing there, just listening in, I think the means to do it is all there, right? We've got everything we need to do. It's just a case of aligning everything to be able to go do it. So, that's Claudine. That's really kind of nice note to finish on. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. We could have carried on all day, but as you've clearly explained to me, you've got a very busy kind of intro of stuff to get on with. So I won't take any of your time, but it's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure speaking to you too.
So it was a real pleasure to spend time with Claudine and look back on just how much sustainability has changed, but also crucially just how much is still left to do as we build towards some key milestones on the road to net zero by 2050. And for the edie listeners, the Green Room will return in 2025 with a host of new guest speakers. So be sure to look out for those and our other audio features on edie Extra. The edie Extra channel can be found under the edie.net website. Just search podcasts edie Extra, and that's available on all audio channels, including Spotify. And until those next episodes air, thank you and goodbye.